Morning, Mr. Chairman and Ms. Vice Chairman, members of the committee. Appreciate the chance to be here. We too are having a little bit of fun in the audience, and hopefully we can provide some education on this issue. It is an important issue to us and some of the members that we represent. So I'll give a little brief background. Again, John Dulmes here, Director of the Michigan Chemistry Council. Our members are large chemical manufacturers, distributors, and other companies that use our products. And we are one of the largest manufacturing sectors in the state with about 120,000 jobs that we support. There may be a few, as well as many other districts across the state. If your companies may not be in the district, but you may have companies, or you certainly have companies that use our products. And so we are essential to many things, including energy products like solar panels, wind turbines, and batteries. And we took a very keen interest in this legislation last year. Probably the most particular reason is because our companies are energy intensive and they use a lot of both electricity as well as natural gas. You may know this or may not that a lot of chemistry products and a lot of the materials around you come from natural gas as a feedstock. And so I'd be glad to talk to you further about that kind of issue. But in terms of electricity, we look at it as a competitiveness jobs issue. It's our ability to grow jobs in the state and not just absorb, what would be considered an affordable rate hike, but actually manage your electricity supply. And there's many ways that our companies do that, including things like self-generation, cogeneration, demand response, investing in energy efficiency. But one of the most important ways that some companies do that is through electric choice. And that allows companies to negotiate a long-term contract, manage their energy supply, including renewable energy. It's one of the primary ways that a company can choose to go over and above the 10% or 15% RPS is by going through a choice supplier and getting 100% renewable energy, as some of our companies have done. So to give a little background in terms of looking back in 2000, electric choice began because of uncompetitive rates and attention to this issue. And not to deliberate too much of what was discussed last year, we did provide numerous testimony on the issue of choice and other things, but our ratepayers have compensated the utilities to open up our electric markets by paying $2.2 billion for the assets that they owned that would have been potentially at risk because of choice. So in terms of the debate of the merits of the issue, we think that's an important consideration and something that should be kept in mind if we're talking about where the capacity has to come from. Since 2008, the electric choice market has been limited to 10%, and that had a huge impact on companies that wanted to access that option. Currently, there's a long line to get into choice. In consumers, it would be 28% if there was no cap. In DT, it would be 19% of people that have signed up to access this program. And our rates, if you're not on choice, are pretty high. Michigan's electric rates, I just checked recently, the most recent data from June shows that we have the 14th highest electricity rates in the entire country overall. And for residential customers, your constituents, it's the 12th highest. And we're kind of an outlier among many states in our area. So that's some background on choice. We'll get into a little more with Josh and I here about the issue of the LCR and how that was negotiated. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. And as John highlighted, we're very grateful for the opportunity to speak with you today. Excuse my voice, I'm fighting something here. Just going briefly back into the debate from last session, as you know, the PA 341 represented multiple years of work, of committee hearings, testimony, stakeholder meetings, and much more. Many parties, including the Grand Rapids Area Chamber and Michigan Chemistry Council, along with other stakeholders, formed a coalition who actively worked in both the Senate process and when it came over to the House to improve the legislation by supporting reliability in Michigan, but while also protecting Michigan ratepayers and looking forward to improvements to make sure that there's a long-term viable electric choice program in the state. This legislation was tweaked frequently in the Senate, especially, and I would say that it kind of changed from outright eliminating the choice program to more specific and I don't want to say hidden, but more detailed specific items that we felt threatened the long-term viability of this program and Michigan ratepayers. And some of these include closing the queue, a one-time decision for choice users to remain on choice, affecting the way that the alternative suppliers can access the MISO market, and there's many others, and we can go into details if there's specific questions on that. I would say that in the Senate and when it came over to the House, our coalition of association, businesses, and schools worked with the legislature to support amendments that would address a few priority improvements. And one of these improvements was focused on the local clearing requirement. Given the energy package was one of the biggest items of last session and it was a top priority for many stakeholders in the state, a lot of time and effort went forth into trying to find a way to bridge the divide, especially in the final weeks of session. Among the final changes in this compromise that came together on the eve of adjournment last year was the removal of the local clearing requirement language in Section 6W. I believe you have a handout that highlights the language that was in Section 6W and what was replaced in Section 6W. I will tell you that this was a top priority for our coalition, and this local clearing requirement language was specifically removed from this legislation. The negotiated language specifically allowed suppliers to use any resource that could reliably deliver power to Michigan customers, and that's determined based on MISO's allowed resources, MISO being the Regional Transmission Organization. This compromise included many other concessions from both sides, and at the end we all hailed it a success, which is why it's so concerning that we're back here today rehashing a lot of these old arguments. You know, ultimately many groups supported or at least went neutral on this legislation because they believe this issue, among others, was solved and that the long-term viability of electric choice was handled. And we believe that many in the legislature had the same perception in mind when they cast their final vote.
And kind of to add to that too, in terms of could we address this through clarifying legislation? I think one of the things that was realized with last year's legislation is that many sides had to give, and there was trade-offs being made. And indeed, I would say that the choice supporters gave away a lot of trade-offs in the legislation, and some of which has already taken effect. And I'll highlight one for you is that the 10% cap that people think about, there's actually a provision that says that if choice goes below 10% in any utility service territory, that is then locked in or reset at a lower number. I call it like a ratchet. And in fact, in July, the Public Service Commission, in implementing that part of the law, actually reset the cap to 0% in 12 different utilities in Michigan. And that has already taken effect. And that is, in essence, the consequence of what would happen if the choice market was affected. You could potentially have a lockout effect. Even if the legislature could act at a later time to address that issue, you would have the fact that the choice cap has already been lowered and more customers are kicked out of the program. And so that's one of the things we talk about is that this legislation should be implemented as a whole, including all the trade-offs and compromises that were made last year that both sides gave. So
all it's got to do is ratchet it down one time, and then the ratcheting down is locked in for
a period of up to 6 years.
6 years. So if the outcome of a decision on September 28th were to result, like it did over in the market in the far southwest part of the state, in the elimination of electricity choice customers below 10%, even for one day, then the ratchet is in place for 6 years. That prevents anybody from getting back in. Is that right?
A little bit longer than one day. I think they look at it based on a rolling average, but
Okay.
yeah, that's
average of weeks, months.
I wouldn't be able to tell you. I could give you some answer to that, but you do point out a good point. In 2012, we did see the effect of a capacity charge, which is really what we're talking about here, is that a capacity charge could be placed on choice providers and choice customers. And in the southwest portion of the state, that capacity charge took the choice program from 10% down to 0%, where it has remained since that time for 5 years and now has been locked in at 0%.
And that was
So that's
overnight.
Yeah, that was the effect of a 2012 decision by the commission. Right.
Yeah. Representative LaFave.
Two things, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman. Can you repeat the 12, you said 12 service territory part?
Right. There was an order, I think it was June 12th. I can give you the information exactly what it was, but they reset it to 0 for 12 different service territories, many of which are on the Upper Peninsula, that have just not had much choice participation over the years for various reasons. But one of them, the biggest one, would be the Southwest Michigan, Indiana, Michigan Power Territory, where it was a result of a capacity charge.
And kindly, if you could, when you have time, get me those in the Upper Peninsula that have been taken off the choice market. And a quick question.
Yes, sir.
Tell me your opinion on this. Is it, say I had a business and I really wanted to go 100% green energy, renewable. Would it be cheaper to make a solar plant in, let's say, Tristan Cole's district, or perhaps maybe in Florida to produce that solar power?
I would refer you to the experts in the industry that could comment on that. I think that having access to leveraging our import capabilities when it's reliable is a positive, and that having access to other regions it sometimes can provide a benefit to Michigan customers by offering more affordable energy.
And at least in theory, it might be more cost effective to get wind energy out of North Dakota.
In theory, but I would, again, direct you towards the kind of industry experts, folks that actually build those plants to fully grasp all the details that go into it.
Well, appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Representative Fave, we did have a testimony to that effect in a hearing prior this year where somebody said that wind power out of Oklahoma was 3 cents a kilowatt hour. And if we build it in Michigan, it's 8 cents a kilowatt hour, and you could just as easily contract it from Oklahoma at 3 cents instead of 8 cents. Gentlemen, some members of the committee, we've had statements submitted to the PSC from the Michigan Public Schools Energy Cooperative, from ABATE, which is made up of major manufacturers like Dow Chemical and General Motors and U.S. Steel and some of those folks. You guys have said in your communications that you think if the June 15th or August 1st directives are implemented on September 28th, that would threaten electricity choice. I've had some members express skepticism that this threatens electricity choice. So could you walk us through exactly how you think the June 15th preliminary order, the August 1st draft by staff, if that's adopted as policy on September 28th, how does that affect electricity choice?
So I'll start on that. Again, this gets very much in the details, and as we have talked about today, the order isn't issued yet, so it's kind of difficult to sit here and say, well, the commission's going to do X and it's going to lead to Y. I would say that we've made it very clear in all of our communications to the commission and with other stakeholders that we're significantly concerned. There's a reason that the language that you see in front of you from the Senate-passed version of the bill, the SB 437, there's a reason it was one of our top priorities to get out of the bill, and that 50% pro rata we were concerned was going to kill electric choice. To make it kind of simple, and I think it's already been discussed a little bit here today, the threat is based on how they implement it. Again, I don't want to paint with too overly broad brush, but I think I have to at this point, that the alternative suppliers will be forced to build or buy in Michigan, even if there's power that they could get from another zone that can reliably serve Michigan customers. Now, the generation in Michigan is owned by the incumbent utilities, and trying to negotiate contracts there, which are also probably spoken for in a lot of ways, leads to concerns about whether or not it's even feasible. And so you're looking at, it's not going to kill choice in terms of the program is gone. It's going to be like it is in Southwest Michigan, as we mentioned, where choice is 0%, and then it gets locked in there for a certain period of time.
And I would add to that too, I mean, talking about the local generation, as we mentioned, that local generation has been built and paid for by Michigan ratepayers. And Michigan's electric choice customers paid for the ability to essentially have another option, even though that was already paid for. And in this case, you'd be asking them as a choice customer and their supplier to go back and have to negotiate to access or source it from that particular supplier when that has basically already been contributed towards. And we feel that's, some unfairness there, as well as just the practical effect. We believe that a choice market needs to not just have one or two suppliers, but to actually have competitive options within the choice market. And there definitely will be suppliers forced out of the market, even though there is power available. One of the things the staff report did mention is that they don't anticipate that we are going to utilize all of our available import capacity, and that's something that we believe benefits Michigan ratepayers as we're part of a regional grid.
I also don't want to overlook the risk of overbuild that was mentioned earlier too. We obviously a lot of this focus on the electric choice customers, but Michigan ratepayers, most of our members at the Grand Rapids Chamber, we have 2,400 members, aren't able to access electric choice. They're in the queue, or they're not able to be on that, and so the 5% overbuild, if that's the reality that comes, obviously this is all still very much in the details, is a significant.
Who said there's going to be a 5% overbuild besides me?
I am reading that from the MPSC staff report from August 1, when they talked about the two options that were outlined there. The phase-in approach, which we feel is very similar to the language that was removed from the bill in the final compromise, we feel that that overbuild is a significant threat for Michigan ratepayers that's not providing added reliability.
And so you read it in the August 1st document by the PSC's own staff. because, you know, when we're speculating as to what the PSC is likely to do, I note they didn't have their staff draft an order by which not to impose the local clearing requirement. Now, is it possible they could reject what they instructed their own staff to come up with? Yes, but at least as an outside observer, I interpreted the fact that they had their staff draft an order to impose the rule meant they were likely to impose the rule. Otherwise, they would have told the staff to draft one imposing the rule, draft one not imposing the rule. At least that's how I interpreted the process. But please walk us through how you, because I think you were the source of the $1 billion figure attributed to the 5% overbuild. How did we come up with that decision or that calculation?
I don't know if I was the first source of it, but I think that it was based on the 5%. If you take that, put it into megawatts based on Michigan's load, and then use DTE's recently announced natural gas plant as a proxy, which was, it's roughly just short of $1 billion most likely. But again, that's very much focused on a lot of ifs at this point as we go forward. I guess this is why we want to shine so much light on this process, because of the uncertainty and the concerns we have over it.
So if we take the dollar amount DTE says it's going to take to build a plant to generate a certain number of kilowatts, and we apply that to Michigan's entire load, 5% comes close to $1 billion out of the pockets of all customers, utility customers, not just AESs.
Yeah.
So it goes far beyond just impacting customers. As the PSC's own staff said, it might negatively affect the customers of AESs. Is that correct?
All ratepayers.
Okay, all ratepayers. Any other questions?
I just wanted to thank again the committee. If there's other questions, be taken, but I want to reiterate that choice may not be a priority for everyone in the committee. Certainly it's a priority for many, and I think, as some folks have stated here, it was probably the biggest issue in getting the energy legislation passed was resolving the choice compromise. And it's our opinion that this language being removed is allowing us to sit here today with an energy law in the first place. Otherwise, it may not have passed. But that being said, there are a number of other compromises that were made in the legislative process that are now being implemented by the Public Service Commission, including net metering, the green pricing provisions, PURPA for small generators, the code of conduct for value-added services that utilities may offer. And I think it's just of interest to the legislature and to the committee to make sure that these are being implemented in a way that respects the compromises that were made and is faithful to the law that was passed. And again, we're waiting for the commission to make its order. We respect them greatly in the work that they've done. It's been a tremendous amount of work, and they have really stepped up to the process. But this particular provision is one that's of significant concern to us.
Thank you, gentlemen.